Hello! In this video I will answer all of your questions about game development. Quick introduction, my name is Jonas, I'm an indie game developer and I've been making games for more than 10 years now. Recently had my first commercial success with Islanders, which we made in a team of 3. Now I'm working on a solo project called Will You Snail.
That was awesome.
And it's a game where you go head to head with a superhuman evil AI that makes fun of you. If you like being made fun of, then Will You Snail is the game for you.
The rules are simple. You just try to reach the end of the level, and I'll try to kill you. Good luck.
Wishlists are highly appreciated, links are in the description. What got you into game development? For the most part, my father, who's a programmer, he just saw that I really enjoyed making these paper games, card games, board games. So one day he showed me Game Maker, and that's how I got started with game development. What career path did you take education-wise? So I live in Germany, I made my Abitur here, or the US equivalent of that would be your high school diploma. And then I studied game design at HEW Berlin, Bachelor Game Design, which is a pretty great school. For example, Islanders started out as a university project there. I didn't quite finish my studies there though, because I wanted to dive right into independent development. What were your games like when you first started? Pretty horrible, of course. If you still have your old projects, it would be cool to see them. Yeah, I still have quite a lot of my old games actually, so if you want to see them, then just check out the video I made about them. I'll link it here and in the description. How much it took you from knowing nothing about Unity to being an intermediate that includes C#, art, game design? I think you can become a pretty decent game developer in just 1 or 2 years. That is entirely possible. The reason why your question doesn't quite work is because Unity was not the engine that I used to learn game development. My first game engine was Game Maker, so when I started learning Unity I was already at the intermediate level. Out of all your old games, which is your favorite and least favorite? I'd say my least favorite is probably Spoontastic Baby, which was a mobile game. A favorite one of my old games is called Pink Fishy, where you destroy a fleet of submarines and boats with a tiny little fish. That's what I call a power fantasy. Why did you start a YouTube channel? Firstly, to promote my games. Secondly, as a second leg to stand on in case game development doesn't work out for some reason. And then thirdly, in order to help you. Do you need a beastly PC to start game development? No, not at all. Some game engines, of course, need more performance than others. One game engine that is bragging with being very efficient and lightweight, for example, is Godot. What engine or code language to create your games in? It really depends on what you want to make, on your situation. As I said, for example, if you have a really low-end PC, then perhaps you want to go for Godot. If you want to make a 2D game, then maybe you want to go with Game Maker. If you want to make a 3D game, then maybe you want to go with Unity. And the same for programming languages, really just depends on what you want to make. My number one advice would be not to stress out about this decision too much, because once you've learned one programming language and once you've learned one game engine, it is actually a lot easier to switch to different programming languages and to different engines. I would say if you're just getting started, Unity is not the worst decision. Just go for Unity, it's free, it's cheap, and it offers a lot of possibilities to grow in the future. How did you learn to code? As a newbie, I keep copying scripts, I also try understanding them, but now I'm supposed to remember so much stuff. I want to code without copying. This is a very common misconception I see about programming. A lot of people think that programmers remember all of the functions. Basically what you're asking is a little bit like, imagine you're writing an exam in French or whatever. You're like, but how am I supposed to remember all of those vocabularies? But the twist is you're allowed to use a dictionary. So the answer is very obvious. You just use the dictionary. You don't have to remember it. And then all you need to learn is a couple of very basic things for each programming language. For example, how to do if statements, how to do for loops, how arrays work, etc, etc. You just gotta learn how all of that basic stuff works. That is actually not a lot you have to remember. And then you can just look the rest up if you need it. And actually professional programmers do it just like that. What I would recommend to you is start with some simpler and easier programming tasks. You can only learn how to write scripts yourself if you start writing scripts yourself. And if you want to start writing scripts yourself, then you have to start with something very simple and basic, and then slowly work your way upwards. What tips would you give to an absolute noob with Unity? And most importantly, I would like to have tips to absolute noobs with C#. If you're really an absolute noob, then I highly recommend you check out my Unity tutorial for beginners. Otherwise, the way to learn is just to gradually keep increasing the challenge. The main thing you need is patience and the ability to pick the correct challenges at the correct time. Do you think 2D is a little easier to create than 3D for a beginner? That once again depends on the engine. For Unity, I would say 3D 3D is actually easier because Unity was designed as a 3D engine, and working in 3D in Unity just feels a bit more natural. But if you're using something like Game Maker, then 2D is the easier option. One dimension more or less doesn't make a big difference in terms of coding. As a beginner, I'm trying to learn ECS. Should I start making games without ECS first and later learn ECS? All of you don't know what ECS is. It stands for Entity Component System, and it is a way to code your games in a more efficient manner so they run more efficiently. I'm not sure how much harder it is, honestly, because I don't know how to use ECS, full disclaimer here. My general advice would be no, you don't need ECS as a beginner. There are more important things to focus on. But if it interests you, or if you want to make games that have better performance, if that matters to you a lot, then go for it. What advice would you give to a person who started working in Unity and already knows beginner stuff? An intermediate person, I would say how to get to that point where you know enough to make something on your own and be comfortable with the most of the things in Unity. I would say that is actually another misconception that a lot of people seem to have, that you learn, and then at some point you have the skills you need to make a game. I would say it is completely the other way around. You can learn how to make games extremely quickly. For example, in my beginner tutorial, you can learn how to make a game within half an hour. So you actually don't need a lot of knowledge to make a game. You don't need a lot of skills to make a game. I think it's a lot more healthy to look at it the other way around and be like, okay, which games can I make with the things I know now? Which kind of games can I make with the skill sets I have now? If you're making games in Unity, then at the beginning, perhaps you're limited to a couple of rolling balls and cubes and whatever, just very simple and basic stuff. But you can actually make good games with that. So just work with the restrictions you have, make the games you know how to make, and then just make those games, and that will expand your skill sets, and that will give you even more opportunities to make other games next time. Is it a good idea to remake old games like Zelda, Mario as a training for a beginner? I mean, sure, it can be a good challenge to learn programming, for sure. The one thing I would keep in mind though is that you always get better at the things you do, which means if you copy old games, you will become better and better at copying old games. If that's what you want to get better at, good. If you want to get better at designing your own games, coming up with your own ideas, then that's what you should be doing. Very simple, very logical. You just become better at the things you do. So do the things you want to become better at. How to get to the next level in game development. When learning, it seems like you learn a lot when you're a beginner, but then the learning process slows down and you keep developing with the same ideas. So how to get to the next level? The way you get to the next level is by increasing the challenge. Usually that happens automatically, because if you keep doing the same things over and over again, at some point you just start getting bored of them and you'd want to try something new. And that's how you grow. The next time you make a game, just ask, how can you make this more challenging? But not too challenging. And if you find those projects that have just the right amount of challenge, then you'll grow by working on these projects. How much money do you make from games? That will probably soon be revealed in a separate video. I feel like that deserves its own video. But I have to say, enough to make a living at the moment. And if you haven't made any money yet, do you think game dev is a good thing to make money? No. Game dev is not a good way to make money. And how do you make marketing for your games? Check out my marketing video. Wink wink. Do you ever worry about your current game being unsuccessful? Yes, I do worry about that. Which game developer doesn't? It can always happen. It's kind of unpredictable. If so, how do you keep motivated to continue development? Just because I worry that it won't be successful doesn't mean that I know it will be unsuccessful. So there's obviously the hope that it will be successful, and that's what keeps me motivated. Have you ever thought of programming in other fields besides games? Thought about it? Yes, but I don't want to do it, was the conclusion of my thoughts. If so, which ones and which programming languages do you know? I know C# and GML, which stands for Game Maker Language. I know a little bit of Python, but nothing to write home about. Top 3 favorite games of all time: Portal, StarCraft, The Talos Principle. But there are a lot of really good games like Inside, A Tale of Two Sons, great. What do you think about Nintendo? I think they make good games. Do you have special memories of Nintendo games, or did you never really get in contact with them? Unfortunately, the second one, I didn't really get in contact with them. Do you ever wish your voice was different? No offense. Why would you ask something like this? I know I have a little bit of a funny accent because I'm from Germany, but other than that, are you working on a game beside Will You Snail? No. It is always pretty tempting to start something new and to start working on something else, because that beginning part of a project is always the most fun. That's where you can put the most amount of creativity in a project. That so-called shiny object syndrome, where you want to start something new all of the time. I have that a lot actually, but not at the moment, no. I think the main reason for that is that I'm pretty happy with Will You Snail. I'm still pretty excited about Will You Snail. And also I'm starting to learn that if I start a new game project now, in 3 months I'll be at this place again where I'm like, I want to start something new. So I hope I have outgrown that a little bit. I'm not sure though, I might be wrong. What makes your games unique? Excellent question. What makes Islanders unique is that it's a very simple and minimalistic city builder that doesn't even have resource management. And what makes Will You Snail unique is that you're constantly battling and interacting with an AI, with an artificial intelligence. Having something that makes your games unique and stand out is pretty important, I think, because that's pretty much the only advantage we have as an indie developer, right? We can make things that are different and unique and interesting, so we should use that advantage. How can I make a successful game? You can do that by hitting the subscribe button and watching all of my videos. Also, I think what's pretty important is that you make a game that is marketable, because if you have a game that is marketable, then you can more easily market your game, and marketing is important for selling your game. And the easiest way to make a game marketable is to make a game that has a lot of appeal. Appeal is basically the quality of your game that makes people go, oh, I want to play this, when they see a screenshot of your game or when they hear about your game. Unfortunately, game development is one of those things where there are thousands of things that can ruin your success. And basically the way to be successful is to dodge all of those bullets, like in Matrix. I've only had one successful game, so perhaps it's too early to ask me about this. How do you start to self-promote your stuff? What channels are best to build an audience? I personally really like YouTube, surprise, surprise. Discord and Twitter are great as well, but it's also just a matter of preference. What are you good at? What do you want to do? If you're good at writing, then perhaps you should start a blog or a website. If you're good at making videos, then you should make videos. If you're good at making funny little GIFs, then perhaps Twitter is the place for you. So it depends on your skill set, it depends on what you want to do. YouTube is great because it allows you to build a very loyal audience. Twitter is great because a lot of games press, a lot of games journalists hang out on Twitter. And Discord is just a very direct way to communicate with your audience. What is your #1 tip for finishing a game? Great question, because finishing games is actually one of the most difficult parts about making games. Finishing games is a lot harder than you think. It takes a lot longer than you think. It can be very misleading because when you start making a game, it feels like you're making progress very quickly. But the further you are into developing a game, the slower things will move. So you have to be very, very careful with your scope. The #1 thing you need to do is you need to keep the scope small enough. You need to make sure that the game you're making is small enough so you can finish it. Tim Ruswick has a pretty cool rule that I like. He always says, whatever you want to make, cut it in half. Cut your idea in half. I perhaps would go even further and say, just do 10% of the idea that you wanted to do. Make that and make that into a fully contained, finished game. And then you can still gradually expand and increase it afterwards. So what you want to do is you always want to keep your game as close as possible to being a finished game. Because for every game, I feel like there are different ways to build that game, right? You can either build it in a way where it's always very, very far from being finished, or you can build it in a way where it's always very, very close to being finished. And you just need to build your game in a way where it's always very, very close to being finished. How do you come up with ideas? Glad you asked. Check out my video about that. It's a little bit of an older video, but it's still very up to date and relevant, so check it out. Hey Jonas, I'm currently working on a top-down shooter game with a few puzzle elements, and I wanted to ask you if you think that there's an audience for games like that. I'm afraid that's not enough information to tell if there's an audience for that. If your top-down shooter is different and interesting and appealing, then of course there's gonna be an audience for it. Because most people I spoke to about it told me that they think that most people would much more likely play 3D games just because that's something they know better. I mean, whoever said that kind of has a point, because a lot of people just want to play AAA stuff with awesome graphics. However, there's still a massive audience for indie games, there's still a massive audience for 2D games, so you can totally make a 2D game work. Like, saying that only 3D games work, that would be ludicrous. I'm working on a story-driven puzzle game, and I'd really appreciate some rule of thumbs, tips, advice. Excellent video idea! I don't think that this is something I'll be able to cover in a Q&A session, but I actually really like designing puzzles, and I think I have a couple of really good tips for that, so stay tuned. One of the upcoming videos, I hope, will be about that. Just as a very quick starting advice, I feel like what a lot of people get wrong about puzzle design is that you don't start puzzle design with the puzzle, you actually start puzzle design with the rule set. So you, without even having any puzzle in mind, you just design a random rule set, an interesting rule set. You start exploring that rule set, what is possible with that rule set, what is difficult and challenging to pull off with that rule set, and that's what you're gonna turn into the goal of your puzzle. Voila, now you have a puzzle. Suppose we are using the personal version of Unity and our game finishes in 8 months, and in the last month we buy Unity paid version, so will the logo still come? So will there be the Unity watermark in the game if you've developed the majority of the game in the free version of Unity, but then you buy the paid version at the end? The answer is no. If you export your game with a paid Unity version, then there will be no logo. What is the salary for a game programmer in the first, second, third and fifth year? I don't know, but definitely a lot less than in other industries. The internet says between 40 and 60k per year, but obviously still very much depends on the company you work for. What advice would you give to someone who wants to enter the games industry as a game designer? That's actually another question I get a lot. The most important thing if you want to work in the games industry is get the skills you need to work in the games industry, and there are a lot of different ways to get those skills, especially nowadays where you can learn everything online. You don't need to visit a game school. Gather experience by doing your own little game projects, and then the number one thing you need to do in order to get a job in the games industry is just to build up a portfolio. So just having a little portfolio website that shows all of your works and what you can do, and if that is any good, then your chances of getting hired are actually quite decent as well. And then the second part of the question, with the fact that I currently live in a third world country, that doesn't really change a lot about the question because you can still get hired over the internet, right? So that means if you manage to get the skills you need to work in the games industry, then you can probably work in the games industry. And is getting a degree in North America or Europe the only option I got? No, I don't think that's the only option you've got. As I said, most game dev companies don't really care about your degree. They care about your skills and about the fact that you're a nice person they can work with. So that's the two qualities you need to bring. You need to know what you're doing and you need to be a nice and reliable person. And you of course need to be able to show both of those qualities. Would getting a degree in North America or Europe help you? Probably, yes. It would probably be an advantage. But I don't think it's the only option you got, no. If you would like our game to be reviewed by you, what do we need to do? The answer is I announce those videos beforehand. Before I play your games, I always post an announcement in the community section of this channel. Or if you want to make sure that you don't miss it, then you can also join the Discord group. Link to that is in the description as well. So I just announce beforehand when I'll record these videos, and then you have some time to send in your game, and then I'll pick a couple of the games that are sent in, because the amount of games you're sending me is just getting too high. I can't play all of them. Hi Jonas, I know you don't play mobile games for your channel, but if you find one you're interested in, would you play it in your spare time for fun? Yeah, sure, I would do that. I've done that a couple of times actually. Also, perhaps we might do a Jonas plays your mobile games video one day. Is there any useful but unknown software that you like to use? I really love snipping tool because it allows you to take screenshots so easily. My whole digital life has changed with snipping tool. And then also I think a lot of people underestimate the power of game engines. There are so many cool things you can do with game engines. That is not really an unknown tool, but it's definitely an underutilized use for a tool. If you want to know what I mean, then check out my 5 reasons to learn programming video where I show off some of my coding projects. How can I make my game work in Windows, Linux and Mac? That depends on the game engine. In Unity, for example, it's very easy. You just hit export for Linux or export for Mac. And if you want to export for Mac, you unfortunately need a Mac because Mac doesn't want developers to make games for their platform, so they're trying to make it a little extra hard there. In theory, it should just be one button, but then usually what happens is that once you've got that game on that platform, there are a ton of additional bugs that you need to fix. How to get motivation? Just answer those 2 questions. Why do you want to do it? Why do you think it's worth it? If you can't answer those questions, then yeah, perhaps you shouldn't do it. And if you can answer those questions, then hopefully you will feel inclined to start working now. That's all I got. How can I overcome procrastination? You're asking the wrong person. I'm struggling with this a lot as well at the moment. So just plan exactly step by step what the next steps you need to take are, and that hopefully will make it a bit easier. You also see a lot of programmers that play the piano. I didn't realize. How do you keep focused? By eliminating all distractions, by doing enough sport and by eating healthy. Have a nice working environment, take enough breaks, have the correct lighting as well. How do you make decisions in your team when your teammates disagree with an idea of yours or vice versa? We made Islanders in a team of 3, and the way we dealt with situations like that was just democratically. Due to the fact that we were 3, that was oftentimes very easily possible. Basically just need to find one more person that's on your side and the decision is through. Plus with 3 people there can't be a tie. I feel like the more people have a say in the decision, the harder it is to take a decision, of course. So what I would say is if your team is larger than 3 people, then try to reduce the amount of people that have a say in certain decisions. Maybe your artists shouldn't be able to vote on the game design decisions. Maybe your game designers shouldn't be able to vote on the art decisions. If taking decisions in your team is just too difficult, then you need to set up certain boundaries and you need to set up certain systems, certain rules how you want to deal with situations like that. For example, you can set rules like, okay, if we can't find a decision in X amount of time, if we can't agree on something within 20 minutes by discussing the issue, then Tom will decide because he's the team lead or our vision keeper or whatever. Those rules are something you probably have to discuss with your team as well, how you want to handle decision making. But I feel like that is a discussion worth having because it will make all of your future decisions so much easier. What are you planning on doing when you're done with Will You Snail? Sometime in spring I want to start another game project with Grizzly Games, so the team I made Islanders with. Do you have any ambitions to work in the AAA games industry one day? Hell no. Might change in the future, but at the moment, absolutely not. Have you ever wanted to collab with another game dev YouTuber for an official Steam release? Not yet. Do you consider a proper studio name in case you ever decide to hire additional studio members? I mean, I'm already a co-owner of Grizzly Games, so I already kind of have a studio name. I'd prefer to keep it to one studio for now, but who knows what the future brings. Would you work as a full-time game developer? I'm already doing that. What is your dream game project? I would really like to make a tower defense game, because I've made a lot of tower defense games when I was younger and I feel like I could make a really awesome kick-ass tower defense game. One day I'll make that happen. And Welton asks, what are some of your long-term goals? The only goal I have at the moment is to keep making games and to be able to afford to keep making games full-time as an indie developer. That's the only goal I have at the moment. And even though that might sound humble at first, it's really not. It's really asking for a lot. Where do you see yourself or your channel in the future? Myself, in the best case scenario, I managed to make a couple more successful games. A couple of things that I'd really like to experiment with in the future is perhaps hiring an editor. The ratio at the moment has tilted a little too much towards making videos. So having somebody edit my YouTube videos or something like that, that is something I definitely want to look into at the moment. I don't think I can afford an editor, but hopefully I will be able to do that sometime soon. Cats or dogs? I would say dogs have a better cuteness factor, but cats have a better cuteness to effort ratio, so I would go for cats. Will you snail? Yeah! Bruh, 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 bruh. Can this be the first question? No. And for the grand finale! The questions I get by far the most. Let's just answer them here so I don't have to answer them again. Why are you making Will You Snail with Game Maker and not with Unity? The answer is I really like Game Maker for simple 2D games. However, I do think that Unity is a lot better for 3D, and Unity is also a lot better for bigger game projects. Game Maker is like really fast for smaller game jam projects and stuff like that. But also it's kind of hard to keep big projects clean in Game Maker, and there are just a lot of architectural things that you kind of don't have in Game Maker but that you need in order to keep your game organized. So if I would make Will You Snail again now, I would go for Unity. However, when I started this project, I thought it would just be a small 2D game, and it turned out to be more than that. So now I'm stuck with Game Maker, which, to be fair, is not the worst thing that could happen. Game Maker is a perfectly solid engine for 2D games. I went for Game Maker as an accident, but to be honest, it doesn't really make a big difference. It's fine. Then, secondly, can you make a tutorial about insert tutorial topic here? I can, but I probably won't. Personally, I don't really enjoy making tutorials that much. There are more interesting videos I could make. Making tutorials, to be honest, is a little bit boring sometimes. And then also, if you're asking me about a very specific tutorial, like how do I create a gravity inverting plasma gun in Unity, can you make a tutorial about that? Then the answer is an even stronger no. On this channel here, I want to help as many game developers as possible, and I feel like making super specific tutorials like that is just not what this channel here is about. And from now on, if you ever see somebody asking a question I answered in this video, please be so kind and just link them to this video, because there are timestamps to all of the questions in the description. I kind of feel like I keep answering the same questions over and over again, so hopefully this will help a little bit. I want to thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.